Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Jeanette's Gift by Blossom Turner, narrated by Connie Shabshab. I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works. Psalm 139, verse 14, New King James Version. Chapter 1. Spring 1881, Shenandoah Valley. Jeanette Williams' body wilted and sagged, pulling her thin shoulders forward. 29 felt like 99. Until this birthday, Jeanette had held a smidgen of optimism that she would someday marry and have a family of her own. All hope was gone. God had somehow forgotten her. The cheery frosted cake that sat on the table seemed to mock her dreary existence. "Auntie Jeanette," her 4-year-old niece Gina pulled on her hand. "Can I help you blow out the candles?" The child could extinguish them all for all Jeanette cared. At her nod, Gina jumped up and down and smiled, the mirror image of her raven-haired, blue-eyed mama, Catherine. Seemed everyone from the youngest to the oldest was attractive, except Jeanette. "Not until it's time, Gina," Colby said. "So quit bothering your auntie." Jeanette glanced at the child's father before she lifted Gina into her arms. "You're not a bother, are you, Pumpkin?" Gina wrapped her chubby arms around Jeanette's neck and pressed in a hug. An ache rose within. Oh, how she wanted one of these little ones of her own. She gazed around Catherine's parlor at those trying their best to give her a birthday celebration and forced a smile. Tears bit behind her lids and she pushed her glasses higher on her nose, glad she could hide behind Gina to conceal the watery flow. Present were Pa, Catherine and Colby, and their brood of kids, Lucinda and Joseph with their family, and Gracie and Matthew, visiting from Richmond with their 4-month-old baby. Despite being surrounded by those she loved most, Jeanette's throat constricted to an impossible ache, and acute loneliness crushed in. She stooped down to let the squirming Gina go, and stood with her shoulders squared. She best get used to spinsterhood. She had a lot of living yet to do, didn't she? Gracie moved beside Jeanette and gave her arm a quick squeeze as if she were reading her mind. The giant knot in Jeanette's throat tightened. "How are the students this time of year?" Gracie asked. Her knowing eyes held compassion. "I bet with the warmer spring weather they're not too focused." "So true." Jeanette gathered her emotions and tucked them deep. "This next stretch until the end of May is the hardest to keep them learning. We lose a lot of the older boys to necessary farm work this time of year." "But I heard enrollment has never been higher," Catherine said. "Crazy how Agnes keeps sending disparaging remarks about your teaching style to the county superintendent. Little does she know that Colby is good friends with him, and we can counter the untruths." Jeanette batted her hand in the air. "Agnes has wanted my job ever since I was picked over her. She's been beating the 'it's not fair a married woman can't still teach' drum ever since she got married. And I don't disagree with her. I just don't like the way she's trying to push me out. She thinks if I weren't teaching, then the school board would be forced to hire her." Lucinda's brows arched. "Well, you're more charitable than I would be. Besides, Lacey Spring couldn't find a more admired teacher than you. Those children love you." "Yes, you have a gift with little ones," Pa added. "Teaching is the consolation prize when one can't find a husband and have a family of her own." The words slipped off her tongue with a bitter tone. She had not meant to be that transparent. The room fell silent. Jeanette bit her lower lip and turned to her niece. "Gina, I'm ready for my birthday cake. Are you going to help me?" Gina squealed in delight, diverting the attention from Jeanette's foolish words. If only they weren't true. In the cool morning air, Jeanette lifted her head and her spirits, determined to fight off the depressing effects of yesterday's celebration. God's mercies were new every morning, and it was up to her to find the truth in that passage. The mile-long walk to the nearby school gave her time to ruminate about the lessons and pray over the day. If nothing else, she was dutiful in her faith. The fragrance of lilacs filled the air. She paused at the array of blooms hanging heavy over Helen Donovan's white picket fence and fingered a panicle. Dipping her head, she breathed in deeply. Ah, now this was the closest thing to heaven she would get all day. "Do you want a few for a bouquet, dearie? It will brighten up that schoolroom." Jeanette looked up to see Helen rocking on her veranda, sporting a welcoming smile. Despite it being first thing in the morning, her thick, wavy silver hair was perfectly coiffured. "Goodness, you're up early?" "Don't know how many more beautiful spring mornings I'll have. Seemed a waste to spend it in bed." She beckoned with a wave of her hand. "Come, I'll get you some scissors. I know how much you love those lilacs." Jeanette strolled up the cobblestone pathway toward the small but cozy home. Helen tried 3 times to pull herself from the rocking chair to no avail. "Either this chair is getting smaller, or my behind is getting wider." She chuckled as her plump bottom flopped back down. Sit. I know where they are. I'll help myself." Jeanette pulled the screen door open and walked into the familiar kitchen. Funny how at 29, an 80-year-old woman was her best friend. Helen had picked up the pieces of Jeanette's broken heart when she'd lost her ma, and from that time forward, Jeanette popped in regularly to visit her. She loved the older woman's company because she understood loneliness, having lost her husband years before. Helen had a way of caring deeply, especially for the misfits like Jeanette. She pulled the scissors from the drawer and hurried outside. She must not dawdle. She wanted to have plenty of time to organize her day down to the last jot and tittle. She snipped at a few clusters and returned the scissors to the rightful drawer. Back on the porch, she smiled down at Helen. "Thank you. I'll stop by again soon." "You're such a dear." Helen lifted her spotted hand to squeeze Jeanette's arm. "How is it that some fine man hasn't snatched you up already?" How, indeed. No man was looking for a homely woman snuggled up next to him in bed. Jeanette dropped a kiss on Helen's papery cheek and set off. She refused to think any more about men or the lack thereof in her life. Teaching was her reprieve from the monotony, the schoolhouse the only place where she contributed to the world and had purpose. She found joy in doing it well. She reached the one-room log schoolhouse. The door squeaked as it swung open. She would have to get Pa to oil that for her soon. She hung her cloak on the first hook in a row that lined one wall and placed her lunch pail on the bench directly below. No need to start the pot-bellied stove in the far corner on such a warm spring morning. One less thing to do. She straightened the few rows of benches facing the front. Now, where was that mason jar? It would be perfect for the lilacs. Ah, there it was, tucked on the nearby shelf. She moved across the room to the washstand and dipped water from the drinking bucket to fill the jar. She plopped her lilacs inside and took a moment to arrange them before setting the jar on her small desk. The school board could afford only a table, but thanks to Catherine and Colby's generosity, she had both a desk and a bureau to store the children's records. She best review her preparations for the day's lessons. With grades from 1 to 8 and ages from 5 to 18, there were a lot of wheels turning. She pulled her outline from the small carpet bag she toted to and from the school and sank onto the hard wooden chair. As she settled in, the door creaked open, and 8-year-old Laura Wallace poked her head in. "I know I'm early, but the others aren't coming today," she smiled. "May I help with something?" Jeanette waved her in. "Your older brothers aren't coming again?" "Papa says he needs the boys around the farm this time of year." "Even Benjamin? He's only 7. "Papa says it's time he learns how to feed the chickens and muck out the stalls." "And the other girls?" "Little Tessie is not feeling well today, so Sarah had to stay home to look after her." Jeanette sighed. She couldn't blame the father. With 6 children to care for and having lost his wife, he must be overwhelmed. News was buzzing around town about the handsome widower and his big family who'd recently moved into the area. They had bought the old rundown Reiner place. All the attractive women, whom Jeanette couldn't hold a candle to, were a Twitter. She ought to go introduce herself. She made a practice of visiting every parent, but her stomach had twisted into an ugly knot every time she'd tried. Single men, especially a handsome man, made her tongue-tied and awkward. How would she find the strength to do it? "Could you clean off the blackboard?" She handed the cloth to the blonde, curly-haired child with cherub cheeks. "I'll do the top, and you do the bottom." Lara's smile split wide. Jeanette had heard Mr. Wallace was a city boy with hopes of giving his family the farm life. Pod mentioned how the soil was fertile and, with a few bumper crops, he would be on his way. She prayed for the sake of his little ones that it would be so. "How about I walk you home today? It's time I make my acquaintance with your pa." She forced the words out of her mouth. She had to get this done. Those kids were missing too much school. Most times a visit encouraged better attendance. Plus, it was Friday, and she would not be missed at home. Pa went over to Catherine's for the evening meal. It was Jeanette's one night off a week from cooking for him. Lara stopped swiping at the chalkboard. "I, don't think Papa would like that." Jeanette sat in her nearby chair so as not to tower over the child. "Why ever would you think that?" "He's not much for talking to strangers, and he tells us to stay clear of the townfolk." Now, that was odd. He brought the children to church, but come to think of it, he never interacted with people. The most anyone could get from him was a lift of his hat. Of course, the women loved the mystery. Not so with Jeanette. She was his children's teacher and should have no qualms about visiting. She only wished her head would tell her stomach, which gurgled and complained at the thought of confronting this handsome widower. Jeanette stood and resumed cleaning the board. "Well, I'm not a stranger or one of the townfolks." She cleared her throat against the knot of tension settled there. "I'm your teacher, and I make a point of meeting all the parents, so we'll walk together and I'll have the delightful pleasure of getting to know you better. How does that sound?" Lara smiled and flung herself at Jeanette, her slender arms wrapped tightly around her waist. Startled at the reaction, Jeanette bent to give the child a proper hug. Lara melted into her arms and wouldn't let go. Soft sobs broke out until the girl hiccuped. "What is it, dear child?" Lara muffled into her shoulder. "I miss my Grammy so much." The feel of the child's arms around her neck broke Jeanette's heart. She knew what it was like to lose a mother as an adult. How much worse would it be for a child? She would help out in any way she could, but first, she needed to see what was going on at the Wallace home. That gave her a boost of courage. She could do this. She had to do this for the children. "Sweetie, you go ahead and cry. Missing those we love when we move away is normal." Jeanette held her until the sobs subsided. Funny that it was not her mother she said she missed. Just how long had Mr. Wallace been a widower? And why would he choose to drag the children away from the only mother figure they had? Chapter 2. A soft afternoon breeze teased a few strands of Jeanette's hair free from her careful bun. She curled them around her ear. She had made a point of finishing the school day at 2 on the dot, which would leave plenty of time to walk to the Wallaces, have a short meeting, walk home, and enjoy a quiet evening with no cooking necessary. Who was she kidding? Catherine thought she was doing Jeanette a favor when she invited Pa to supper, but in reality, it emphasized her acute loneliness. Knots crowded the space between her shoulder blades. Was she doing the right thing arriving at the Wallace farm unannounced? From the time she had told Lara she was coming for a visit, the typically bubbly child had been quiet. What was she troubled about? With Jeanette's shy personality, she found these home visitations difficult enough without confronting hostility. Jeanette didn't correct Lara as she kicked pebbles, scuffing up her shoes while they walked toward the child's home. She was clearly bothered. What could Jeanette say to keep the conversation flowing? So, does your Grammy live back in the city? Grammy is dead, just like Mama. Lara looked at the ground and kicked another rock. Jeanette's hand pressed against her mouth to still the gasp. So much loss for one so young. Had the two deaths happened close together? She dared not ask. She reached for Lara's hand and pulled the child to a stop. I'm so sorry. Crouching down to eye level, she held open her arms. Can I give you another hug? Lara collapsed against her and the tears started afresh. Jeanette smoothed her hand up and down the child's back. Lara pulled away. I'm not supposed to be a crybaby. She sniffed and rubbed her hand across her nose. Jeanette pulled out her handkerchief and wiped at the trail of moisture. It's not being a crybaby when we weep for those we love and miss. You should have seen me when my mama died just over a year ago, and I'm an adult. You cried? Lara's blue eyes widened. I surely did. Then my brothers would for sure call you a crybaby. Jeanette breathed a sigh of relief. At least it wasn't her father calling her that. Brothers can act tough sometimes. It's their way of holding back their own tears. It is? It sure is. Now come, I want to meet your papa. Jeanette held out her hand, and Lara's small fingers interlocked with hers. She swung her arm, causing Lara's arm to swing too. Lara grinned up at her. There you go, sweetie. That's just the smile I was looking for. They reached a long, winding driveway with ruts and grass growing down the center and turned up the lane. With Lara's hand still tucked into hers, Jeanette took in the dilapidated condition of the Wallace farm. The old fence showed signs of being newly repaired. A skinny donkey chomped on the grass. The roof of the barn sagged in desperate need of attention. The structure did not look safe to enter. The small farmhouse was no more than a run-down shack. A few planks covered the broken glass in the lone window. The porch had boards missing, an accident waiting to happen, and the fields that should have been planted by now had weeds knee-high, all but for a small cleared section they'd obviously been working on. Why would anyone with 6 children to care for buy a place that needed so much work? She and Lara climbed the rickety stairs to the porch, and Lara jumped over a missing plank as if it were no big deal. She swung open the door and called out, Sarah, Teacher Williams is here. 10-year-old Sarah climbed down the ladder from the loft, which was open to the room below. At least the ladder looked new, and the railing above secure. A wall with unpainted wood that looked considerably fresher ran down the center of the loft. Both sides could access the ladder in the middle. Teacher Williams, what are you doing here? Sarah moved toward her, biting down on the nail of her baby finger. I'm just going to visit with your pa like I do with all the parents. Jeanette's gaze traveled quickly around the main room, taking in a large table in one corner filled with dirty dishes below the remaining cracked window pane. Aside from the wash basin on the kitchen counter, it was covered from one end to the other with dirty pots and pans, tools, and what looked like soiled clothing. The floorboards were so filthy that Jeanette couldn't tell where one plank ended and another began. The half-boarded window choked most of the light from the room. The place could not look more depressing. She put a hand to her mouth to cover her horror. How is your sister? Jeanette hoped her shock was not obvious. She should stay and help this family, but the last impression she wanted to give was that of an old maid trying to snare a husband. She's sleeping? Do you mind if I take a quick peek? Jeanette asked. Sarah's dark brown eyes flitted to the door. I'm not sure, and Papa is not here to ask. He's out in the field. Of course he would be out in the field. She had not thought of that, and he certainly would not appreciate a total stranger meddling in his life. Her stomach felt as twisted as a wash rag, but she couldn't leave them in this state. Why don't you let me ensure Tessie is fine, and then the three of us can work together on cleaning up and surprising your father with a hot meal when he and the boys come in?" Sarah's dark eyes brightened. "You'd help us?" "Indeed. We all need a helping hand now and again, don't we?" The niggling doubt of what she was suggesting turned into a full scratch. Sarah's gaze flicked away, as if she could see through the walls to the fields beyond. "But Papa says—" "Come on, it'll be a wonderful surprise for your Papa. He's been working hard in the field all day, and you've had to care for your sister." Jeanette gave her most winsome smile, the one she reserved only for children. "I guess that would be all right." "Of course it's all right." Jeanette put a bounce of confidence she did not feel into her words. She climbed the steps to the loft and turned toward what was obviously the girls' side. It held a semblance of order, whereas one peeked to the boys' side with clothing strewn atop the 3 straw-filled mattresses and all over the floor told a different story. 5-year-old Tessie lay sleeping on her mattress. Jeanette bent low to touch her hand to Tessie's brow. It was warm, but not overly hot. The little child turned her head into Jeanette's hand, and she stroked the side of her face and whispered some loving words, things she thought Tessie would have heard her mama speak. Tessie's small, skinny hand latched onto Jeanette's, and she smiled in her sleep. Jeanette could barely find the strength to break free. A sting prickled behind her eyes, but she stuffed the ache down. There was work to do. She climbed back down the ladder. "Your sister is fine. She probably just picked up the cold that's been going around. Sleep is the best thing for her. You did a good job looking after her today." Sarah's head came up. A wide grin replaced her worry. Jeanette surveyed the room. "All right. This is going to be fun. What time does your papa get in from the fields?" "Not until near dark. He says they have to use every bit of daylight they can to get the field planted." "Perfect." Jeanette clapped her hands. "That will make the surprise all the more dramatic. We have time. First things first, open that door and let the afternoon sunlight pour in and give us some much-needed fresh air." Jeanette pulled at the chain she had around her neck and opened her oval watch. It was 2:30. By her calculation, they had 4 hours to work a miracle. A lot could be done. "We begin with fresh water. Where's the pump?" Jeanette followed the girls out to the pump, each of them carrying a tin bucket. After hours of work, Jeanette's fingers were red and raw. Her insides were jumping at the thought of Mr. Wallace walking through the door. With every passing moment, that reality became more frightening. Had she stepped too deep into Mr. Wallace's business? The troubled waters in her mind rippled with concern. She stood back and surveyed the finished product. Every dish was clean, the tools were placed in one corner, the table was set for supper. The floorboards sparkled, and a load of laundry was hanging on the line in the cool evening breeze. Jeanette's famous biscuits were baking in the oven, along with an egg creation seasoned with cured ham and cheese. Fried potatoes crackled in a pan on the wood stove. Jeanette was ready. If nothing else, she was resourceful. But had she overstepped the boundaries? Since when was helping a neighbor not the right thing to do? She prayed Mr. Wallace would not think she had designs on him. Oh gosh, she should have thought this through better. She had merely seen a need and jumped in. Rather than stay, she could leave, and the girls could explain. Yes, that was what she'd do. No, she couldn't do that. She had to be there to take the food out of the oven in case the others didn't arrive in time. She'd gotten herself into this uncomfortable pickle, and she would have to see it through. "Girls," she bent down and beckoned them closer. "You have been an enormous help. You should be very pleased of the work you did. Your papa is going to be so proud of you." The 2 older girls beamed up at her. Blonde, blue-eyed, and fair-skinned Laura was the complete opposite to her sister Sarah, who had brown eyes, almost black hair, and darker complexion. Jeanette glanced at Tessie, who'd come downstairs and rocked in the chair by the fire, sucking on the corner of her blanket. Freckles dotted her ivory skin. The coppery tones of her curly mop glowed in the light of the fire. The children could not look more different. One would never think them sisters, but then again, no one guessed she was a sister to the 4 beauties in her family. Everything within Jeanette wanted to sink into that chair and lift Tessie onto her lap to snuggle her close. She longed to soothe the angst that compelled the child to chew on her blanket. But Mr. Wallace and the boys were due back any time, and holding the child would be far too familiar. The door burst open, and Mr. Wallace came barreling in with Ben, Charlie, and Jacob close behind.
"Sarah, I've told you never to start a fire."
He stopped short at the sight of Jeanette and took one glance around the room.
"Who are you? And what the blazes is going on in here?"
Sarah jumped. Laura's eyes filled with tears, and Tessie popped her thumb in her mouth and began rocking the chair furiously. Jeanette squared her shoulders, her hands fisted. She would back away from most any confrontation, with one exception. How dare he frighten the children? Chapter 3. Well, good evening to you too, Mr. Wallace. Jeanette straightened to her full height and stepped forward. The man still towered over her. That was indeed a novelty, considering she was as tall as or taller than most men she met. "I'm Miss Williams, your children's teacher." She held out her hand, doing everything within her power to still the tremble. He reluctantly gave a short but firm shake. Dang those glasses of hers. They were sliding down her nose. She pushed them into place without shifting her gaze. She would not cower. Unusual light brown eyes framed by dark brows and thick lashes glared down at her. She was close enough to notice tiny hazel flecks swimming in the depth of his stare. How could his dark brown, closely cropped hair look so perfect after a day in the fields? She took in his strong features, wide forehead, full but neatly trimmed beard, and then her brain reminded her not to ogle. When she opened her mouth to speak, the words stuck in her throat. I mean, oh goodness, the biscuits. She raced for the oven, grabbed a towel to protect her hand, and swung the door open. With a flick of her wrist, a pan of golden perfection landed on the breadboard. She could talk now that she wasn't staring at that flawlessly created man. "I came this afternoon to meet you, as I do with all my parents, and found the girls in a moment of need."
"My girls are none of your business."
"But of course they are. I'm their teacher, and I'm heavily invested in all my students." She busied herself lifting the biscuits from the pan into a basket. "Besides, any good Christian would be propelled to take action in the circumstances."
"My circumstances are none of your concern."
She ignored him altogether and pulled the saucepan with her egg creation from the oven. Glancing over at the girls, she smiled. "Your daughters are amazing. All they needed was a little direction. What hard workers they are." When it came to being an advocate for the children, this man could not intimidate her. The look on those girls' faces was all that mattered. She flipped the potatoes in the pan. She chanced to peek at Mr. Wallace. He gave her a steely-eyed scowl, which only made her want to laugh. She held out the basket of biscuits. "Sarah, dear, come put these on the table. And Laura, grab the butter, will you?" She lifted the hot saucepan and breadboard and carried them to the table, centering them for easy access. "Boys, go wash up," she said. "Supper is served." "Sure smells good, Teacher Williams," Charlie said as he headed to do her bidding. "That's because it is. This is one of my pa's favorites." She spooned the fried potatoes into a bowl. "Tessie, dear, do you feel like eating?" Tessie was still rocking in the chair. She nodded her head. Mr. Williams followed the boys out to the pump. When he returned, he took off his hat and placed it on the hook by the door. He did not say a word as his family bustled around him. Jeanette held back a smile. Gather around. Jeanette waved them over with a spoon. The children scrambled into their seats.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?